Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Rosser, a co-founder of Reform Elections Now, and I'm pleased to introduce today's presentation on disinformation, a virus infecting democracy. We know it has a critical impact on the state of our government and on society itself. Our presenter is Lucy Kennedy, a member of Reform Elections Now senior team of 8 leaders who are mostly graduates of Harvard Business School. She has been active in the political environment long-term and more recently attentive to the crisis of disinformation. Reform Elections Now, or REN, was inspired by a series of HBS reports on the US competitiveness and our political system by Catherine Gale and Harvard professor Michael Porter. An early broad survey report of HBS graduates found that the largest single factor limiting our national competitiveness was our political system. Around 2018, a small team of HBS graduates in New York City believed this was a great opportunity to probe this concept and take steps to potentially improve it, and created REN with a nonpartisan mandate. We focused on the election process, primaries, final elections, gerrymandering, campaign financing, things of that type, along with legislative paralysis and disinformation. Ever since, we've been creating and writing reports on these various topics and talks to a growing audience. Our goals are largely educational, but focused on recommendations based upon objective, nonpartisan evaluation of different approaches and their pros and cons. For further insight, anyone can look at our website, reformelectionsnow.org. Lucy has taken special interest in disinformation in particular. She is a retired marketing executive with a BA from the University of Michigan, an MA from Stanford, and an MBA from Harvard Business School. In addition to REN, she is active in other political reform organizations, including a League of Women Voters and the Leadership Now Project. Her pursuit of interest in local history, she produced a website to document the history of Lenox, Massachusetts, where she resides, which was a former Gilded Age resort. Let's welcome Lucy on disinformation.
Thank you, Bill. And let me see if I can, whoops, nope, that's not what I wanted. Here we go. Okay. Can everybody see the slide?
No?
You can't.
Screen.
Okay, let's see. Why can't you see the slide? Okay, now we have it again.
Is it share screen?
Here we go. Okay. Can you see it now? No. Okay. No, you can't see it, can you? You can just see me.
Yeah.
Would you like me to share my screen?
I had it up before, but then I turned off screen share, so I'm not sure why.
Can you turn screen share on again?
That's what I thought I just did.
Oh.
Do you see the presentation when you do screen share? Do you see that?
No, I just see the desktop.
Is it in the desktop when you hit screen share?
Let's see.
Here we go.
Oh, almost.
It's looking good.
All right, let's see. Moral of this story is
There
if
you
you
go.
get,
That's it.
if you get screen share, don't turn it off, is the moral of that story. Okay.
Very good. Great.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. And thanks to Ren for letting me look into this important topic. Because it's a new topic, we'll do a quick, what is it? why it's a threat, what's happened to make it such a threat, and what things we think we can do about it. First thing I learned was that truth is relative. There are very few things that are absolute facts. Misinformation usually refers to unintentional errors. Disinformation usually refers to when someone sets out to mislead. And often it's based on not a simple misstatement of fact, but things being out of context or other tricks. Propaganda is disinformation propagated by government. We as humans are the ultimate receivers and actually the root of the problem. Emotion often overpowers logic, and even when our logic is working, it's imperfect. The cartoon shows a woman saying, "How do we know if a news story is true?" And the man says, "Because I agree with it." That's cognitive dissonance. We seek out media, people, even facts that agree with our point of view. Repetition is another fallacy. Lock her up, stop the steal. You hear something over and over and over again, and eventually you think, well, gee, there must be something to it. Context, things taken out of context can come in all sorts of forms. Recently, as many of you business people on the call know, Bob Iger returned to Disney. Some cable commentators said it was because his predecessor had been too woke as a CEO. I think that there also might have been some influence by the fact that fourth quarter results produced a 30% sell-off in share value for Disney. But anyway, that's an example of something being taken out of context. Proportion, I'll have to read this one as an example. The AP did a 12-month study of the 2020 election and found that Biden won the contested states by a total of 311,257,000 votes. Of those, 475 were found to be disputed. So you could say that shows election fraud, but that would be a problem of proportion in logic. Lots of other tricks we play on ourselves. It really becomes a threat when it starts applying to elections. Now, this isn't a new thing. Remember, Hillary Clinton questioned Russia's influence in 2016, and we all know where that went. And certainly, we can all remember the hanging chads and Bush v. Gore in 2000. However, January 6th took it to a whole new level. 2,000 people stormed the Capitol, and some people died. The latest election results were promising in that things like the gentleman pictured here, Cisco Aguilar, defeated a gentleman named Jim Marchant for Secretary of State in Nevada. And that's significant because Marchant was leading a coalition of secretaries of state who wanted to overturn the 2020 election. So Jim Marchant's defeat is a promising sign, and certainly a lot of election deniers lost in contested states. Nonetheless, we're not out of the woods. Nearly a third of Americans still believe Biden won the election by fraud, and that's 61% of Republicans, so certainly not to be ignored. So why has disinformation become such a dangerous thing? One reason is that faith in government has plummeted from a high of 77% in the Kennedy era to about 20% most recently. And I apologize, the chart is slightly difficult to read, but you get the downward slope. And this makes it easy to come up with conspiracy theories. Also, the root of arriving at evidence-based reasoning is having some interpersonal debate. And instead of having interpersonal reactions, that's the blue line, which is going south, we're spending more and more time on passive digital media, TV, computers, etc. That's the red line. We all remember Robert Portman and Bowling Alone, so this is not a new theme. And polarization is something we've talked a lot about before, but I just thought this was a particularly interesting chart. 8% of the population is extremely liberal, and let's see, 6% extremely conservative. Well, that still adds up to only 14% of the population, but they probably account for a heck of a lot more than that percentage of noise. People are getting more and more of their news from digital sources. What this chart shows, if we look, I don't know if I can point. Oh, yes, look at that. I can point. Whoa. 51% are getting their news from digital sources, including social media, and only 36% from television, and print is negligible. And it's particularly true for younger people. This orange bar shows that 90% of people under 35 got their news from some digital source, and only 57% of them turned to television for some of their news. Obviously, television is still king for older folks like many of us. Why has this happened? Well, part of it is changes in regulation and technology. One is the business model. Print used to get its revenue from both print and from subscriptions and advertising, but its advertising revenue was blown apart by the internet. And newspapers were probably the leader in checking facts and having reasoned debate. I can remember growing up when there were two newspapers with different points of view in my town. Radio and TV used to have limited bandwidth available to them, and the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, could bring the hammer down whenever they wanted. Not so true now that we have satellite availability, unlimited channels for TV and radio. Also, a lot of regulations repealed. There was something from 1949 to 1987 called the Fairness Doctrine. And this meant that you were required to broadcast controversial issues pro and con. That was repealed in 1987. And now it's almost less than being fact-based. It's more favorable to have controversial content. It gives you better viewership and more ad revenue. It's also cheaper to have a talking head than to actually produce a news program. Now, digital is a completely different business model. Advertising is their sole source of revenue. And if it bleeds, it leads. The more controversial the content, the more traffic, the longer people linger on the site, the more dollars they get. Anyone can create content and publish almost instantaneously. The content can be highly targeted, and the volume is almost unlimited. It's staggering how many views that something like Facebook can get. And that's not to negate the fact that something like Fox News, which is the most highly rated cable channel, gets 1.3 million views a day. Digital volume also includes non-human contact. Elon Musk made this a big deal when he was purchasing Twitter, that he said, oh, all your accounts are bots. But Twitter says it's only 5%, but that's still a lot of non-human content. A quick example, the ladies pictured here are Shay Moss and her mother, Ruby. They were election workers in Fulton County, Georgia. And they, late at night, counting ballots, they moved a box and one or the other passed the other breath mint. Now that was picked up on security video by our very favorite New York guy, Rudy Giuliani, and he passed it on to One America Network, a very polarized TV channel. It then hit Twitter, Facebook, etc., and was almost instantly seen by millions of people. And channels like Fox News picked it up and said, gee, I wonder if those are Biden ballots that are being added. And things that, were speculative, but added to the disinformation. It was only up for about a day before they corrected it, but it was enough to put these women's lives in danger. They had to have police protection. Their lives were ruined, and P.S. They're suing Rudy Giuliani. So this is kind of the whole poisonous mix of disinformation. So let's move on to hopefully more cheerful topic of what maybe we can do. What about good old libel and defamation? I've shown Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, both because we like to show celebrities and also because this was a very rare instance in which a defamation case was won by the plaintiff. I had lunch the other day with a couple of lawyer friends, very discouraging. They said it's extremely difficult to prove because you can convey all sorts of disinformation with innuendo. You can say something like, gee, did you know there might be thousands of Italians bringing fentanyl over the border? Well, that's clearly ridiculous. But the way you said it means that, you know, A, it's not one person, and B, it's innuendo. It's not a statement of fact. Unlike other media, digital makes it even harder. Section 230, which I'll detail in a second, protects the owners and transmitters of social media from any responsibility for libel. Evidence can be made to disappear very quickly. Posters are anonymous, or certainly can be, and there's a huge speed of disinformation being put out versus the time to adjudicate. Now, regulation, we keep hoping will save us, but it's like juggling an elephant. Every minute, there are 510,000 comments on Facebook, 456,000 tweets on Twitter. And I have here 4.48, but I got some new facts today. It's now 4.74 billion social media users worldwide. That's 59% of the world's population. So it's a staggering number. We have a free speech juggernaut, particularly in this country, and it's part of what led to this infamous Section 230. Section 230 was part of something called the Communications Decency Act of 1996, and it says internet no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. In other words, unlike newspaper publishers or TV station owners, if you're an ISP or social media, you have no regulatory responsibility whatsoever, and you can't be sued for libel. How did this happen? Well, in 1996, they must have had a heck of a good lobby. They said, oh my God, it's a violation of free speech. And more importantly, this is going to be a brilliant new technology. And if you impose this on us, you're going to kill the baby in the bathwater. Now, in 2020 hindsight, wouldn't it have been great if we could have started moderating content in 1996? People would have developed completely different systems, but we didn't. So the problem with just getting rid of Section 230 is this volume problem. Who's going to decide what's inappropriate content and who's going to monitor it? However, there might be some good ideas for new regulation. There is a lot of sensitivity in Congress and elsewhere to the impact, particularly on young people, and to how our data is being used, privacy concerns. Senator Amy Klobuchar has been kind of a leader in starting some federal legislation, and there has been some state legislation. As I mentioned here, California is pursuing a bill to hold social media companies responsible for damage to minors. But on the other hand, Texas has just passed legislation prohibiting social media companies from mediating political content of any kind. So we're not sure what will come from social media regulation per se. However, don't give up hope. The threat of regulation might produce industry self-regulation. Now, before you say, oh, you're dreaming, actually the movie things that you see, like, not suitable for children under 18, or, you may see violence in this movie, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all industry voluntary standards, as is, I'm told, the airline reservation system. So it can happen. And companies can have rules about content without violating First Amendment rules. So that might work. Another one that I sort of like is know your customer requirements. I used to work in banking, and this is common in banking and insurance. And I know in things like real estate, you have to show a driver's license. So there are a number of commercial practices where the customer has to be identified and has to show ID, et cetera, et cetera. There are third-party companies that are starting to offer this service. Elon Musk is trying, although inexpertly, as I guess we all can see, to get you to sign up for a service where you can say, I'm verified that I am who I say I am. And there's a sort of a precedent with domain name registration, where there's an industry not-for-profit that controls who signs up for what name. So I think there's some possibilities out there. Now let's see what you think.
So we're going to run a poll, and I'd like to have everybody look at the question and provide your answer. We'll give about 10 or 15 seconds for people to respond, and then we'll see how the audience looks at these 4 possibilities. Let's give it another 10 seconds. Most people have voted. Give you a few more seconds to weigh in. Then we'll end the poll and share the results. Okay, I'm going to end the poll right now. Lucy, do you see the results?
Yes, I do. And that's interesting. Apparently, I didn't succeed in talking everyone out of repealing section 230, as that was the most popular. So, you know, that would work, but good luck in trying to implement it. With that in our back pocket, let's move on to, let's see, I guess I have to close the poll.
I'll do that.
Okay. Can we, let's see, eliminate the poll from what we're seeing? Herb, is it possible to have the poll go away?
As far as I'm concerned, it's away.
Okay.
I don't see the poll.
Okay. Having arrived at several possibilities with legal and regulatory solutions, maybe there's some other ways to shake this apple out of the tree. Perhaps there are new business models. Maybe advertisers will pay a premium to be placed with fact-check content. That certainly works for a lot of magazines and newspapers. Most of the regulatory progress that we've made so far has been related to restricting the use of personal data. And that's kind of at the heart of the current revenue model. You know how when you shop for boots on Amazon, suddenly you start seeing ads for raincoats and umbrellas. That's using your personal data to make more revenue for people who are selling raincoats and umbrellas. And so if that got taken away or even significantly reduced, social media and other digital providers would have to come up with an entirely different revenue model. Apple is already putting some limits on social media providers, and the European Common Market has much stricter standards than the US, so that could happen. Subscriptions is not the craziest idea in the world. And there is a lot of research underway. And the reason I'm going to talk briefly about that is that through new data, people can discover new unmet consumer needs and come up with new business models. And there's a lot of it going on. Stanford Internet Observatory, Yale Information Society Project, Harvard Kennedy School Misinformation Review. There's a lot going on in this area. And fact checking has become a really enormous industry of its, a not-for-profit industry, but a big one. There are 195 independent fact-checking organizations. Many of them are hired by social media providers. It's a big source of their revenue to do the fact-checking for them. Sometimes they're employed by journalists. Sometimes they're employed by people who want to research their brand or something like that. But they're all very interesting. And the way they work is if something is being getting a lot of eyeballs, then that's what they choose to fact check. So I encourage you to sign up for PolitiFact or some of the other ones listed here. Also, although newspapers continue their slide, there's kind of a counter movement in not-for-profit journalism. One of the more interesting examples, I think, is the Texas Tribune. This is a real bona fide newspaper that is a not-for-profit newspaper, you know, printed on paper, shows up on your front lawn, all that stuff. But it's a way of trying to keep not just newspapers, but particularly local journalism alive. There's that one, sorry. Go back for a second. That's journalism, not-for-profit journalism. I'm also wondering if, you know, we talked about one of the root causes being people not debating with each other. So maybe there are things that can be done to counteract that. Perhaps we could have regularly scheduled community debates run by non-partisan organizations such as my favorites, League of Women Voters, or even have a year of national service in which we're forced to interact.
Thank you, Liz.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So also another underlying thing that we work on very hard in reform elections now is trying to improve the trust in government by making our elected politicians more responsible to their voters. And some of the things that we pursue are open nonpartisan primaries, top 2 or top 4, reducing gerrymandering and improving both the access to voting and the trust in election administration. So disinformation remains a threat. We don't have any guaranteed solutions. And we don't have, if there are changes in civil society that make us less prone to disinformation, it's going to take quite a while. However, there are things you can do. You can learn about logical fallacies and try to be honest with yourself about your own predispositions. You can support business models that support factual content. You can support legal actions and regulation that makes sense. And you can donate to not-for-profit journalism and public media.
God.
So there will be more from us on disinformation because it's a huge topic and one that new information comes out on all the time. And also we will be pursuing the question of election administration and why people are denying results of elections as a separate topic. If we have a little time left over, I would love to hear from some of you.
Thank you, Lucy. I think the way to proceed is we have 30 people on the call. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, raise your hand by going to the bottom to reactions and clicking on the raise hand icon, and we'll call on you in order. Mike Otten.
Boy, that works quickly. Lucy, what do you think of the screening process, for example, of groups like Wikipedia or even Google when it comes to managing content? Because, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you want to check this? Google it. Now, I don't think there's any real regulation in terms of that. In fact, advertisers can pay to get their answers up before everything else.
Still on the
You
computer.
listening to the,
By the way, we should ask everyone to please mute them.
I just wanted to
Herb,
ask if you want
you
to
could
get
do that.
leftover Chinese food.
You still have that? Yeah, what else we gonna do?
Yeah, so I
Sure.
think Randy is having Chinese food for dinner. When we get that settled, I'll answer your question.
Herb, can you mute Randy?
So,
What'd you say?
I said there's ravioli that I can take.
No, I'll have the Chinese.
Randy, can you mute yourself?
Yeah, Randy, please mute yourself. Lucy, were you going to respond to Mike?
Yes, I would like to respond to Mike. Mike, I think in many ways you answered your own question. It's not particularly regulated. To the degree it is, things like Wikipedia are sort of self-regulated by voluntary input. And I've seen in researching for this presentation, I've seen a lot of efforts in education, sort of at the 6th grade level, which is where we stop learning anything useful, I think, of how to check the factuality of things. And I guess it's, it's kind of on us to figure out if things are accurate or not. There are also, by the way, I want to say some things in the chat that I would like to respond to if there's time. But Bill, you had a comment.
Bill? Unmute yourself, Bill.
Okay, fine. So following with what Mike just said, I have the same question about Wikipedia. I like Wikipedia. Wikipedia seems to be a good source. Wikipedia, in my knowledge, has no particular advertising revenue to worry about. So can we expand or put more value or treat sources such as Wikipedia as a good way to deal with disinformation?
Anybody want to answer that? Allegra, you know about as much about Wikipedia as any of us.
Yeah, I believe that there is a mechanism for donating to Wikipedia because of course they do have expenses, but I think they prefer to keep it a public resource so that it's free to anyone who wants to use it. I know from time to time when I go on there, they are doing some sort of fundraising campaign and they have a big, sign that comes up saying, please don't scroll past this and donate a few dollars. But that's about all I can tell you on that.
But is it largely truthful in your opinion?
Truthful, I think it's highly regulated, but I also believe that the turnover is so rapid sometimes that they can't always keep up with people adding.
Now wait, is somebody checking all this stuff?
No, I think it's self-regulating. I believe that they
There is,
regulate
they do
themselves.
have, they appoint, and I'm not sure who it is that does the appointing, they appoint some moderators to look at new entries. But I think what Allegra said is correct. Once you're in, the modifications can be made fairly liberally. And they sometimes, I'm not sure when they catch that, they will make a statement that this has not been verified. So Wikipedia does do some of that. Google.
So they're trying at least. They're trying and not doing crazy disinformation to raise more revenue and get more attention. That's not part of their game.
No, I don't think so. And I think they try to be very responsible, but as a result, they also squelch some of the legitimate entries that might get onto the site. So
Well, I guess my opinion is we could use more of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it goes back to Lucy's point. To try and create regulations is very dangerous in the realm of free speech. And one of the things that I think may be very important is to increase civic education. Basically, people have to really learn, even in the schools, it should be a formal part of their curriculum now, to understand how to check information, because that's going to become part of what they really ought to learn to be able to critically evaluate what's being fed to them digitally. Do you agree with that, Lucy?
Oh, totally. Although it's a pretty big ask to put it all on the educational system to make people better consumers of information. We got a lot of that in school, but we also had the advantage of heavily mediated content from 3 network television channels and often several daily newspapers.
Well, what about the youth of America and getting this flood of information? I have some perception, maybe it's false, that the young people are more attuned to the fact there is a lot of disinformation and they're treating it accordingly more than middle-aged people. Anybody else feel that way?
Ron, I don't know if you will be responding to that, but I see your hand up. So why don't you unmute yourself, Ron?
Yes, I was going to ask Lucy how she compares the effectiveness of content moderation and fact checking on the one hand, which is a priori censorship of sorts, versus legal liability from lawsuits such as the Dominion voting lawsuit on Fox News, which is a deterrent. Do you have a comment as to which you think will be more effective in squeezing disinformation out of the media?
You know, hard to say. The Dominion lawsuit is a classic defamation suit. For those of you unfamiliar with it, Dominion Voting Machines has sued Fox Network for damage to their firm's reputation for claiming Dominion voting machines were deficient and led to fraudulent vote counting. As I mentioned, it's extremely difficult to prove defamation, and it takes forever. Think of all the sales Dominion has lost since Fox started touting that. Content moderation, I think, is impossible with the volume involved, but some fear of possible liability from government regulation may help. For instance, most of us drive the speed limit even though we're rarely caught speeding. Or we only drive slightly over the speed limit.
I think they've also, some of the companies that try to use artificial intelligence and keywords and things of that nature to find things. Certainly the policing agencies do that, but that's also dangerous because it frequently squelches legitimate free speech. So it's very tricky.
Yeah, and again, new information keeps coming out on this topic, and I hope we will continue to follow it and share it with our audience. But there are things that are possible technologically, like could there be a cutoff to how many times something can be shared without being fact-checked? That seems like it would be relatively simple to implement from a technology standpoint. You know, in other words, something can be shared 5 times, and if it's more than that, then it has to go to a fact-checking resource, and maybe you even have to pay a charge for that.
You know, that's a view in my mind about artificial intelligence. You know, it's come along, pretty fast. And I think actually that's one possible future evolution of artificial intelligence that will in fact be more capable of actually sizing up the degree of truth. Sounds absurd, but in a few years, I actually believe we're going to get closer to that capability. It may be kind of incredible, but that's one option that's out there.
I agree, there are a lot. Anyone from outside of our group who has a comment or a question, I'd love to hear from you. As I say, this is a new topic, could go in a lot of directions, and we hope to continue to explore possibilities.
Well, let me break the silence. Seems to me that people in this day and age, everybody knows that what you're seeing or reading or hearing may not be truthful. It might be disinformation, misinformation, And I think intelligent people know that you have to take some steps to make sure that what you're taking in is truthful. And I think that intelligent people with good intentions will understand that better and maybe take measures. People who don't care that much might take advantage because they hear or read something that they like, and that's all they need to know. So they go with it. We're never going to stop disinformation and misinformation with a plethora of sources today. I guess we can always make it better. It'll never be perfect.
Yeah, I like the inoculation idea also, that one of the counters to disinformation may be more information. Apparently in the last election, a lot of election officials did that. They put out an incredible amount of information about where you could drop off your ballot, how it would be counted, when it would be counted, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of information to counter potential disinformation. Dave Marcus says he can't raise his hand, so perhaps we would like to hear from Dave Marcus.
Hi, I don't know if I can be heard now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'll unvideo. I'll unlock my video as well so you can see me. I just mainly want to say thank you to John and thank you, Miss Kennedy, for the great presentation. The one comment, or here, instead of a comment, how about a question? In terms of the debate idea of structuring more open debate formally, have you heard of the Braver Angels group, Lucy?
I've heard the name. Tell me more about it.
So I'm just learning more myself. It's I think it's a relatively new group, and their aim is to help bridge bipartisan perspectives in a nonpartisan manner. And there's some focus, it appears, on debate. There we go, somebody posted it. So I'm currently over in Hawaii right now, so I'm looking at helping to spearhead a Hawaii branch, if you will, or chapter. They have their own name for it, but essentially it's a chapter. I was thinking, I think they're doing some work with some Rotary groups, but there's always more to do. I like the people, and I thought it's worth mentioning. So I don't want to take up too much time here.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. It looks interesting.
And I'm happy to I made a number of comments. One of them was about a fellow named Duwan, and in the comment that I made about Duwan, I put a link to one of, sorry for the background noise, but I put a link to one of the videos that Duwan did about disinformation, which will not lead anyone to the group that Duwan is part of that does work with institutions and information, kind of upstream groups, like, for example, news sources and various institutional groups that do provide large amounts of information to the population. So if anybody wants to meet him, I actually don't even think he's got a website for that. It's just, I don't understand why he's not advertising more, but he's a really smart person working with really good people to try to fight disinformation at a kind of a high level upstream. You know, it's not really working with small players. It's mostly large news organizations and institutions, whether it be government, nonprofit, or for-profit groups. So if you're interested, Lucy, I can make that introduction if it's appropriate.
All right, good. We might want to follow up with you. I captured the link and it looks interesting.
I'll hop off. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mike, did you have something to say?
Well, I think I would just add to the point in terms of trying to get unbiased information. There are groups like No Labels, which really tries to seek the middle ground so that it takes what a CNN or a Fox News might put forward and puts it into perspective, gives it context. And I would like to think Reform Elections Now performs that role as well in terms of election process. We try with great diligence to keep our nonpartisan nature by not spreading either disinformation or misinformation. And when we talk about reforms, recognizing that we're not just advocating for a reform because it's perfect, but because we think it's better, or that we can at least recognize the pros and cons. And to talk, for example, about ranked choice voting, which was mentioned earlier, that's an example of something that if it's implemented in the current form, is not perfect. There are some defects with it, and there are political scientists and election students who are creating more nuanced, but probably more complex versions of ranked choice voting that are in fact better, but probably not practical. So there's always a little bit of a balancing act that goes in terms of trying to make something as good as possible and recognizing you can't make it perfect. Does anyone want to comment in terms of the digital media as to where they think they can find, or I shouldn't say digital, let's say the TV stations? I know I've heard Peter once say that the old-fashioned networks are actually more objective in their reporting than either CNN or Fox News. I think that's something that at least is worth mentioning in the context of trying to get the best objective information, unbiased and unspun from TV.
It raises the question of PBS as well.
That's alleged to be true. I must admit, I've occasionally seen PBS go off the deep end, but they certainly try to keep as honest as they can be.
Yeah, I would add that the network television is sort of on its way out, because very few of people of the middle and younger generations actually watch actual television anymore. And so it doesn't really matter. I mean, I also agree that I think that the three main networks appear to be more neutral than the cable channels, just from personal observation. But, you know, that's going, you know, the way of history now. So I think that as Lucy's slide noted, a lot of, you know, people 50 and younger or whatever get their information from completely other sources. And so that's going to be, you know, history pretty soon.
That's certainly an interesting perspective from one of the younger members of our team.
You flatter me.
I'm afraid you're right.
Does anybody have any comments about Twitter and where we think that is headed?
Headed to bankruptcy, it looks like.
But, you know, Twitter and the others, we all know that anybody can pretty much say anything, anytime, and it's out there for billions of people in an instant with no editing, no elimination. You just say what you want.
Well,
And-
Twitter is a great case study, but I because, you know, they live by the sword, die by the sword. They get all their revenue from advertising, and all the advertisers pulled out because they thought it was going to be too crazy. Cindy has her hand raised.
Yeah, Cindy, unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks everyone, and thanks for this information. I just have a comment to add around social media, and getting your news from that source is probably not the best place to do it, because those platforms, it's about revenue from them and making money. And so they're going to have algorithms that keep bringing people back and doing that. So
You bet.
we know that negative posts get more attention and get more in the feed. So we need to look elsewhere for our news. I don't really watch into, or I listen to some podcasts, but mostly I read my news, so that way I can scan and get it from a variety of sources. But we shouldn't be getting our news from social media.
Good point. If you and I, our podcast really catching on.
I'm sorry, Michael, I can't hear you.
I just said that I think podcasts are important, as the young people do listen to them. But I must admit, I find I don't have the patience for most of them. Is there any data on how widespread podcast listening is?
It's growing. I don't have any data in front of me, but it's definitely growing. And it depends on who the person is. Sometimes it's sort of like anything that goes viral. If they're interesting and funny and relevant, they're more likely to get more listeners. There are a lot more democracy related podcasts going right now than ever before. So I think it is growing. So but I don't know the numbers.
Okay, thank you, Cindy.
I wonder how many of the audience here today are regular podcast listeners on a daily or weekly basis.
Mary Jane, did you have your hand up? I wasn't sure. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but I do not use social media, but I have a lot of friends. I, in fact, have a sister who gets all of her news off social media. When I ask these people, what's social media and who is producing this news for me, nobody's ever been able to give me a very good answer. So could you folks tell me exactly what do you go to if you want to get news like I get on NBC Nightly News and New York Times and so on?
Almost all newspapers, even local newspapers, now have digital versions. And frequently that includes a Facebook page or Twitter tweets or other digital access. And a lot of the content on social media that might be channeled to you comes from individuals saying, did you hear, did you know there are aliens landing in spacecraft or other nonsense? But a lot of it is recirculating content from traditional published media.
Oh, okay. So it might be from Fox News, or it might be from the New York Times or whatever. But it's on things like Twitter or on Facebook where individuals post something.
Correct. And they might post their own content, or they might pass on content from someone else. And Facebook is the biggest. It's considered to be kind of old hat by young people, but it's still the largest social media provider.
John German, before you make your comment, we appreciate that you forward our announcements of events to other organizations. Thank you for that. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. Just a comment from my daily walking commute. There's a cookie store called Crumbles that opened a couple of weeks ago, and had lines around the block every day, including in the rain, until midnight. Why? I interviewed many people, who were standing in line, and said, "How long have you been in line?" People who were about to get in, and they said, two hours. So then I talked to people at the back of the line and said, this may take a few hours, and they were fine with it. So, but the question I asked all of them was, well, how did you hear about this? And there was only one answer over and over and over every day. And that answer was TikTok. So I asked people, well, what did you see on TikTok? Was it somebody you knew who posted something on TikTok? Or was it some commercial source that was trying to sell you, something that told you to go here? And they just said TikTok. So there was no discrimination whatsoever. No perception of who the source was. It was, Marshall McLuhan. The media is the message. So I think there needs to be research around that item. And if anybody wants to visit that line, it's taking place every day except Sunday because Crumbles is closed on Sunday. So see what you can make of that. I found it appalling that that there was absolutely no understanding whatsoever about sources among any of the people in line.
Yes.
Now, as time has gone on, one more thing, as time has gone on, there are more people who are there because a friend asked them to go. And so I said, well, how did the friend hear about this? TikTok. Thank you.
Yes, but they don't know who posted it on TikTok. I agree with you about the sources. People tell me things, this is the news that they learned today. Well, what was the source of that? And they don't know. And I guess they don't care, or they.
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. Yeah, I mean, on social media, that these kinds of things that you see are literally advertisements. These are paid advertisers who give TikTok or Facebook or Instagram some money, or Twitter, and then they put up their own ad, just like they would on television, but it's probably just shorter. It's like a few seconds long. I mean, I remember seeing the ads for Crumble on Facebook, so and they were quite appealing, but they were ads. I think that's the largest source of those kind of promotions on social media. But the other type is influencers, and influencers are usually young people, although there was an article in the New York Times this week about grandfluencers who are grandparent age also on social media, but they're a little bit more rare. And so those are people who, for one reason or another, have a really large following on whatever their social media platform is. And they start out by just doing their own thing and getting recognized for whatever their particular area of interest is. But eventually, when they obtain enough followers, then companies come courting to them and ask them to actually promote their products. So those influencers are paid also to promote causes, products. So yeah, those are the basic sources.
In terms of news, though, how do people find out what's going on in Ukraine?
Oh, they put Ukraine into a Google search.
Oh, so they have to be interested in Ukraine.
Yeah. Or if they have clicked on something about Ukraine on a social media post, the algorithm will feed them more information on the same subject. I notice it is 6:32, and I'm not sure which of the many supernumeraries on this call gets to end it. So I will just say that I don't think that was in my job description, so I'll turn it over to somebody else. But thank you all for being such a good audience.
Thank you.
Mike, do you want to make some closing comments?
Well, I first of all thank Lucy for putting this together. It is a lot of work, and it is a field that's in flux, which I think we all appreciate and enjoyed the discussion of. I think we should mention that if anyone wants to see a recording of this or refer it to someone else, we will have it available on the website probably by the end of Thanksgiving weekend. Maybe quicker depending on our technology support, which is all voluntary. We also encourage people to subscribe if they haven't already, so that they get notices of future meetings, because we do have, I think, fascinating insights on some of these areas as a result of having really feedback from people such as yourselves, the kinds of things that were put in the chat, which we try to use as leads for looking for more information. And we really do try to stay as objective as we can. But if you find that we're wandering from that, please give us the feedback. We do appreciate that too. Anything else any of the other team members want to add? Otherwise, then I'll take the prerogative of wrapping up and saying thank you all, and all have a very happy Thanksgiving, healthy, and stay well and come back soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you.